so that it isn't. You see, we seem to have the attitude that something is either illegal or we can just go gung-ho with it and turn it into the product of a multi-million-dollar corporation. It would be much better to just say that the possession of small amounts of cannabis for personal use pose no threat to society, and leave it at that.
Well, how are you going to get your red Lebanese then?
Well, you would find a way, just as one finds a way today.
Easier if there was a government hash shop.
Yes, although I don't find it difficult to get red Lebanese. The only thing I would hope is that we might get a price break if it were decriminalized. It's currently being sold because it's an illegal commodity. It's being sold at enormous markup for what it costs to produce it, and this might be something.
It's a very expensive business.
Well,
but why we have legal alcohol and so many other things? Why not simply legalize it so there can be shops, there can be huge industries, and there can be gourmet growers using special methods and...
Like wine, you mean?
Like wine, exactly.
Well, but then you have these problems which Rupert is pointing out, that once more it's handed over to Madison Avenue to be turned into something where they can't simply say it's available to those who want it.
Well, people living in downtown New York City are not going to be able to grow 8 or 10 plants themselves.
I was recently in downtown New York City, and I examined a pot garden that would have been the envy of any resident of Humboldt County.
Well, real estate is expensive. Spare bedroom with grow light bulbs is expensive, and that's all right. But I think, why not legalization? What are the problems?
Well, probably this would come. And then it would be, as far as the question of children, it would be available, it would be restricted to people below age 18 or something. Right. No, I think ultimately what we're going to have to do is legalize all drugs. Now, a hidden aspect of this is that governments make enormous profits out of the fact that these drugs are illegal. A harmless drug like cannabis, the interdiction, eradication, and the mafias which move it are all spun into government policy. I mean, governments have always been, and continue to this day to be, the major purveyors of drugs worldwide. So really, another factor mitigating the drive to legalize cannabis is where then would the CIA obtain, it would eat into its ability to finance the various rebel armies, front organizations. Yes, but what other way? I mean, for instance, when the mullahs took over in Iran and gained control of the Iranian opium trade, the CIA turned to cocaine and brought on the crack epidemic of the 1980s. So governments would the government then create new synthetic drugs like ice and then peddle them to the public?
Without doubt.
Well, this is just something to realize, that governments, you see, wrap themselves in a mantle of righteousness and tell us just say no. But in fact, governments are making millions off the illicit, billions off the illicit drug trade. The entire Mujahideen resistance to the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was financed with the connivance of the CIA. Hashish was being unloaded on the docks of San Francisco in broad daylight by the metric ton at the height of the Afghan war. We've never been able to get Afghani hash of such quality as we were able to get during the period when the CIA was keen that we buy it so that they could finance the armed resistance to the Soviet occupation. And the day the Russians left, The hashish market in Northern California collapsed catastrophically and has never been able to build itself back to previous levels.
Zhuangzi said, the more it's organized, the easier it is to steal. See, the more substances are controlled, the more shadow space there is for shadow governments, CIAs, mafias, and so on, to operate in the dark. So it's better to let go on all these fronts. And it's happening in Europe, especially, I think, it's much more significant, the decriminalization of heroin. There in these same parks in Switzerland, you see people sharing needles and so on. I think that's a very courageous experiment, and we'll get to see the results, and eventually perhaps it will spread to the United States.
But you wouldn't suggest that we make heroin so legal that you can flip open Time magazine to a color ad that says, "What's missing in your life? Heroin, the drug of choice of the chic young set." This is not what we want.
That would perhaps not be worse than what we've got now. I think that I feel as badly about tobacco as I do of many of these other things. Personally, I had a very negative experience with freebase cocaine. I found this material to be very surprisingly addictive. You know, the tiniest experiment leaves you a total addict. So, in my personal view, this stuff is extremely evil. Nevertheless, I don't think that restricting it by law is an effective strategy to prevent people from getting addicted. I think that crack is similar, I'm not sure. It's extremely toxic material in society, but simply making it illegal just creates this huge shadow trade where it's out of control, and people have to experiment in order to find out what it is. And so the ad in Time magazine would without doubt say this material is harmful to your health.
The Surgeon General has found that shooting heroin is harmful to your health.
Liable to be very addicting after a single experience, and so on. The information would be circulated, the shadow would be eliminated, the secret would be eliminated. I don't think that necessarily means that a lot more people would be addicted. I think probably fewer.
Well, the drug issue brings up the question of whether societies should organize themselves along the assumption that citizens are adults or children. And if you view citizens as children, well, then you have to keep various things out of their hands. If you believe citizens are adults, then you have to believe that certain checks and balances will keep any negative practice from simply sweeping through society and destroying it. I believe that. I believe that if heroin were legalized, a very small number of people would destroy themselves with it, and that's their business, and society can absorb the cost of their slow suicide in the same way that we absorb the cost of the slow suicide that people undergo with tobacco and alcohol.
See, here are some more questions for grassroots science.
Yes, well, in this drug area, grassroots science could do amazing things.
Can be,
it's just that the questions are never asked by big science because it really doesn't want the answers to some of these questions.